Let's start with the truth, not the fairy tale. Women don't just randomly fall for men. They don't close their eyes, spin the wheel, and land on someone. There's a pattern, a purpose, a reason. A woman's heart is not a playground. It's a battlefield of emotions, intelligence, intuition, and experience. When a woman chooses a man, it's not luck, it's alignment. You want to know why women choose certain men. Because energy doesn't lie, because presence speaks louder than promises, because authenticity is magnetic in a world full of imitation. Women don't fall for men who chase every trend. They gravitate toward men who carry values. The men who walk with clarity, not confusion. The ones who lead themselves before they try to lead someone else. Women are drawn to men who don't need to prove their masculinity in loud ways because their silence already commands the room. A woman doesn't choose the man who boasts. She chooses the man who shows up consistently, not when it's convenient. She chooses the man whose actions echo his words, not the one who speaks in poetry and disappears in practice. Let me be very clear, a woman doesn't need perfection. She's not searching for a flawless man. She's searching for a real one who knows how to apologize without ego, one who can be strong without being controlling, one who listens not just to her words, but to her silence, her hesitation to trust because she's been there before. And yes, women choose certain men because they feel safe with them, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Safety isn't just about protection. It's about peace. A woman will never submit to chaos, no matter how good it looks in a suit. She chooses the one who brings her calm, not confusion. She chooses the man who values her mind as much as her beauty. The man who challenges her to grow, not to shrink. The man who doesn't just praise her strength, but respects the journey behind it. Because the truth is, every strong woman carries silent scars, wounds she doesn't always show. And she's not looking for someone to fix her. She's looking for someone who doesn't make her bleed again. A woman chooses the man who can handle her intensity, her intelligence, her independence, not the one who tries to dim her light, but the one who adjusts to its brightness. She chooses the man who isn't intimidated by her fire, but inspired by it. Now some will say, why do women ignore the good guys? That's the wrong question. Because goodness without emotional intelligence is not attractive. Being nice is not enough. You have to be aware, present, purposeful. A woman doesn't just want a man who gives her flowers. She wants a man who understands why she's been guarding her garden. She doesn't choose by appearance. She chooses by alignment, emotional maturity, depth, vision, because the man she gives her heart to, she's trusting with the most sacred part of her, not her body, her vulnerability. She chooses the man who can handle the weight of her trust without dropping it. Because when a woman has carried herself through storms, the last thing she needs is a man who creates more. So why do women choose certain men? Because they've grown, because they've healed, because they've seen what manipulation looks like wrapped in charm, and they've walked away from it. Because they've cried over the wrong ones and finally learned to recognize the right one, not just by what he says, but how he shows up when things get real. She chooses the man who makes her feel valued even in her silence. She chooses the one who doesn't run when she's complicated. She chooses the one who honors her strength without feeling emasculated. She chooses the one who sees her not as a prize, but as a purpose. That's why women choose certain men, because when a woman has learned who she is, she'll never settle for someone who doesn't. A woman doesn't fall in love with a face. She falls for an essence. She doesn't crave perfection. She craves presence. In a world obsessed with filters, she's looking for something unfiltered. In a world of edited photos and rehearsed personalities, she's searching for rawness, the kind of energy that can't be faked and definitely can't be forced. Energy speaks louder than a tailored suit or a chiseled jawline. A woman may admire beauty, but she invests in depth, because beauty without soul is decoration, not connection. And she's done with the kind of men who look good in pictures but leave her empty in real life. She's done with conversations that go nowhere, with attention that comes without intention. She's outgrown the man who wants to be seen more than he wants to see her. What truly draws a woman in is not how a man looks when he walks into the room. It's how she feels when he does. It's not about him being admired by others. It's about whether his presence settles her spirit or stirs her doubts. A man with grounding energy brings peace when he speaks, even in silence. He doesn't rush to impress because he's not performing. His self-worth isn't up for negotiation, and that energy, that stillness wrapped in confidence, that's what makes a woman lean in. She doesn't want to be dazzled. She wants to be seen, understood, felt. Because a woman remembers how you made her feel long after she forgets what you wore. She remembers the calm in your voice, the steadiness in your presence, the sincerity in your gaze. She remembers how your energy didn't push her to prove herself, how it didn't require her to shrink, how it didn't trigger her insecurities, but healed them. There's something magnetic about a man who is deeply present, who's not glued to his phone during a conversation, who looks her in the eyes, not to dominate but to connect, who listens not to respond but to hear. These things are subtle, almost invisible, but to a woman who's emotionally intelligent, they are everything. Because that kind of presence reveals more than words ever could. She's encountered men with sculpted bodies and dead eyes. She's smiled at charming ones whose hands felt cold. She's flirted with the loud, the flashy, the ones who knew how to talk but never knew how to stay. And it taught her, attraction without alignment is noise, chemistry without commitment is chaos, and energy never lies. A man's energy is a reflection of how he lives. A man who is grounded has done the inner work. He knows what he believes, what he values, what he's willing to stand for. He's not looking to complete himself through her. He comes whole. That kind of man doesn't play games because he has no time for confusion. His peace is too expensive to waste on temporary pleasure, and a woman feels that. She feels it in how he speaks, how he listens, how he holds space for her without rushing to fix or judge. His confidence isn't rooted in validation. It's rooted in self-awareness. He doesn't need to prove he's a real man through arrogance or dominance. His energy says it all. He's stable, he's centered, he's real, and that kind of energy creates a gravitational pull that no luxury watch or sports car can ever replicate. Women choose energy because they've felt the pain of chasing appearances. They've been with the handsome man who couldn't commit, the wealthy man who lacked wisdom, the smooth talker who disappeared the moment things got serious. Experience sharpens discernment, and when a woman evolves, so do her standards. She stops looking for the look and starts watching for the feel, because energy tells the truth. A woman can sense the man who is present but disconnected. She knows the smile that's too rehearsed, the compliment that feels transactional. She feels when a man's interest is rooted in control, not connection, when he wants access to her body but not her mind, when he sees her beauty but not her depth, and that kind of man, no matter how attractive, cannot hold her attention for long, because real women, women who have done their healing, don't chase a vibe, they protect their peace. They value emotional consistency. They notice the man who shows up without drama, who communicates without manipulation, who respects her boundaries and honors her pace. That's energy. That's emotional maturity in motion. That's rare, and that's what she chooses. You see, a woman doesn't remember the man who took her out to the most expensive restaurant. She remembers the one who made her feel safest while she was most vulnerable. She doesn't remember the designer label he wore. She remembers the silence he filled with understanding. And in the end, she doesn't even remember the compliments. She remembers whether he made her feel like she mattered. Because energy is not what you say. It's who you are when no one's watching. It's the tone behind the words, the intention behind the actions, the rhythm behind the routine. And women who have lived, who have loved, who have lost, they rate energy like a second language. They don't get fooled easily, they don't settle quickly. They've built walls not to keep love out, but to protect it from the wrong hands. That's why the loudest man often gets ignored, the flashiest one fades. The most popular one loses her interest, because popularity is not presence, and noise is not connection. She's watching the quiet one, the consistent one, the one who stands in his truth and walks in integrity. That's who she chooses, not because he said the right thing once, but because he keeps showing up. Even in intimacy, energy is everything. A woman may enjoy chemistry, but it's connection that makes her stay. When she feels seen, safe, and spiritually aligned, that's when she begins to trust. And trust is the deepest form of intimacy. A woman doesn't surrender her heart to a man who simply excites her. She gives it to the one who grounds her. And that's why women choose energy, because they've realized attraction fades, but alignment doesn't. Looks change, but character doesn't. Physical beauty can ignite interest, but only emotional energy can sustain love. She knows that the man who understands her energy will understand her soul, that the man who notices the shift in her voice will care about the weight on her shoulders, that the man who respects her boundaries respects her. And that kind of man, he's not just desired, he's chosen. So no, it's not about being the tallest or the richest or the smoothest. It's about being the one whose energy says, you're safe here, you're seen here, you're honored here. It's about being the one whose silence speaks peace, whose presence creates warmth, whose consistency builds trust. Women choose energy, not out of emotion, but out of experience. Not out of fantasy, but out of discernment. Not out of desperation, but out of alignment. Because in a world where many men are taught to perform, she's praying to find one who's learned how to be. And when she does, she chooses him. There comes a time in a woman's life when her soul gets tired of chaos, when her spirit no longer dances for unpredictability, and her heart no longer confuses pain with passion. There comes a time when she doesn't want butterflies anymore. She wants balance. Not because she's lost her fire, but because she's learned to protect it. She's learned that peace is not boring. Peace is sacred, and real women no longer crave drama when they've learned the value of their own stillness. A woman who has healed doesn't chase intensity. She recognizes that love wrapped in instability is not love at all. It's a wound disguised as excitement. It's an emotional roller coaster sold as chemistry. And she's done with that. She's done with men who confuse being emotionally unavailable with being mysterious. She's done with the ones who pull her in only to push her away, the ones who create storms and then blame her for the thunder. She wants calm now, she wants clarity, she wants consistency, not empty promises, not vague intentions, and not roller coaster affection. She chooses the man who gives her a soft place to land, not a battlefield to survive. Because safety doesn't mean weakness, and peace doesn't mean the absence of love. It means the presence of mature love, a love that listens before reacting, a love that resolves instead of escalating, a love that doesn't need drama to feel alive, because it feels alive through depth, not destruction. There's something deeply attractive about a man who can regulate his emotions, a man who doesn't let ego hijack his actions, a man who doesn't use silence as a weapon or anger as a mask, a man who can stay calm in the face of conflict, who can be soft without being weak, who can disagree without being disrespectful. That man, he's rare, but when a woman finds him, she doesn't let go, because he's not just a partner, he's peace in human form. She chooses him not because he excites her nervous system, but because he soothes it. Not because he makes her heart race out of fear, but because he makes it rest in safety. And in a world that glorifies toxicity and calls it passion, that kind of safety is revolutionary. It's healing. It's attractive in the most powerful, most quiet, most enduring way. A woman has walked through too many fires to choose someone who keeps lighting matches. She's done with drama that drains her, with arguments that go in circles, with apologies that don't lead to change. She wants a man who knows how to talk through the hard things without breaking everything in the process. She wants a man who doesn't run from discomfort, but grows through it. Because peace doesn't mean there won't be conflict. It means we know how to navigate it without tearing each other down. She's not asking for a man who never gets angry. She's asking for a man who knows what to do with his anger, who knows how to breathe before he speaks, who knows how to express, not explode, because that emotional discipline, that emotional maturity, is what protects love. That's what builds trust. That's what allows two people to feel safe even when the world outside is falling apart. A woman has no desire to walk on eggshells. She's not interested in decoding mixed signals or playing emotional chess. She's not looking for someone to trigger her trauma. She's looking for someone who helps her transcend it. And that only happens in peace. That only happens with a man who's secure enough in himself to create security for her. A man who doesn't confuse chaos with depth. A man who understands that being emotionally predictable is not boring. It's reliable. It's loving. It's what makes her exhale instead of brace herself. She wants to come home to a man whose energy calms the storm in her, not fuels it. A man who doesn't use anger to dominate, silence to punish, or distance to control. She wants a man who stays emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because peace is not the absence of challenge. It's the presence of someone who doesn't abandon you in the middle of it. When a woman has tasted peace, she can never go back to emotional chaos. She no longer gets impressed by loud declarations, but by quiet consistency. She's not swayed by charm, but by character, because the loudest voice in the room is often the most insecure. But the man who moves with intention, who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard, whose presence feels like still water, he is the one who makes her feel safe to be soft. And here's the truth: peace allows love to grow. Chaos only exhausts it. When a woman feels safe, she opens, she blooms, her love deepens, her trust expands. But when she feels like she's in a constant state of emotional survival, her soul shuts down. She stops expressing, stops giving, stops trusting, because she's not a machine. She's a woman, and even the strongest woman has limits when peace is missing. The right man knows this. He doesn't test her strength. He protects it. He doesn't trigger her fears. He tends to them. He doesn't make her earn peace. He offers it, not because she demands it, but because that's the kind of man he is. He's not addicted to emotional highs and lows. He's addicted to stability, to intimacy that lasts, to connection that doesn't have to recover from every conversation. And a woman who's grown knows the difference. She knows the man who brings peace from the one who only brings pieces. She knows that a home built on chaos will always crumble, that love without emotional safety is just chemistry waiting to combust. So she waits. She holds out for the one whose words match his energy, whose promises are backed by action, whose love is not a fire to survive, but a light to live in. She no longer romanticizes unpredictability. She no longer confuses silence with mystery, detachment with strength, or possessiveness with love. She's learned the difference between someone who wants to win her and someone who wants to honor her, and the latter she'll choose every time, because when a woman has healed, she becomes her own peace, and she won't trade that for anyone. not even for someone she once prayed for, because peace is not negotiable, it's essential, and any man who adds chaos to her life instead of clarity, confusion instead of comfort, noise instead of nourishment, he's not her person. She's not afraid to be alone anymore. She's afraid of losing herself in the wrong energy. That's growth, that's wisdom, that's self-worth, and that's why she chooses peace over chaos every single time. A woman of depth is not looking for perfection in a man. She's not waiting for the one with flawless answers or scripted charm. She's not fascinated by surface-level attraction or impressed by shallow gestures. No, she is moved by something deeper, something that touches her spirit and challenges her intellect. She is drawn to strength, not in the loudness of a man's voice, but in the quiet conviction of his character. She respects depth, not in the number of words he says, but in the weight of what he says. And she honors vulnerability, not as a weakness to be hidden, but as a form of strength most men are too afraid to show. Because in a world where men are taught to be hard, silent, and detached, it takes real courage to be honest, to express emotion, to admit fear, to say, I'm not okay, and still hold the space for love, leadership, and loyalty. That kind of man doesn't need to dominate. He doesn't need to project false strength. He stands firmly in who he is, and in doing so, he invites a woman to feel safe, seen, and cherished in the presence of that strength. She sees beyond what the world calls powerful. She looks past the facade of arrogance masked as confidence. She sees that real power is not how much noise you can make in a room. It's how much calm you bring into it. It's how steady you remain when things fall apart. It's how you treat the people you don't need. And most of all, it's how vulnerable you're willing to be with someone you love. Because a man who can be soft without losing his masculinity, he is rare. And he is unforgettable. She respects strength, yes, but not the kind the world promotes. Not the rigid, emotionally distant, self-centered kind. She respects the strength it takes to say, I was wrong. The strength to lead with integrity. The strength to stay loyal even when it's hard. The strength to stay emotionally present when your pride is screaming to shut down. That strength is not loud, but it is powerful. And a woman who knows her worth won't settle for anything less. She craves depth, not drama. A man who can speak about ideas, not just events. A man who's read books, not just chased bodies. A man who's lived, reflected, evolved. Depth is about the way he sees the world, the way he connects dots others miss, the way he sits with silence without needing to fill it. It's in the way he asks questions that stir her mind, in the way he listens not to respond, but to understand. She knows she can find bodies anywhere, but minds like that, hearts like that, they're rare. She's not impressed by a man who shows off, she's moved by a man who shows up. Not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. She doesn't need a man who promises to build a future if he hasn't yet dealt with his past. She needs a man who has sat with his shadows, who has questioned his ego, who has met his demons and chosen growth over comfort. Because that's the kind of man who won't flee when things get hard. That's the kind of man who won't crumble under the weight of intimacy. Vulnerability is not weakness to her. It is proof of security. It is evidence that a man trusts her enough to put down his armor. It is a gesture of emotional generosity, and it tells her one thing clearly: he is real. He is not hiding behind games or false narratives. He is not manipulating with silence or dominating with anger. He is standing there, fully seen, fully felt, fully human. And that is the kind of man who awakens her loyalty. That is the kind of man she chooses to love with her full heart. There is something sacred about the man who dares to feel, because the world often teaches boys to be numb, to suppress, to perform, to never cry, never need, never ask. But a woman of wisdom knows that's not strength. That's survival, and survival can't build love. It builds walls. So when she meets a man who lets his guard down, who opens his heart, who risks being hurt just to be real, that man earns her respect in a way words could never express. Because she knows that kind of courage is not common, that kind of emotional bravery is not taught in schools or movies, that kind of man has to fight battles inside himself that no one sees. He has to unlearn generations of silence, pride, and pressure. And still, he shows up, and that is the kind of presence that doesn't just make her feel loved. It makes her feel honored. She doesn't need a man to fix her. She's not broken. She needs a man who can sit with her in the silence of her complexity. A man who doesn't get scared by her strength or overwhelmed by her emotions. A man who sees her tears not as a weakness, but as sacred truths. And the only kind of man who can handle a woman like that is one who is not afraid of his own emotional mirror. He doesn't run when she opens her soul. He doesn't shut down when she challenges him. He doesn't punish her for being expressive. Instead, he embraces the depth of the woman in front of him because he himself has depth. He listens without defensiveness. He holds space for emotion without shutting down. He stands still when the wind rises because he knows that storms don't break men. They reveal them. A woman like her will always gravitate toward a man whose heart matches the maturity of his mind. She wants the one who doesn't need to raise his voice to assert his presence, the one who knows that emotional intimacy is not optional, it's essential, the one who understands that love is not just felt, it's cultivated. And that cultivation requires work, presence, and yes, vulnerability. She's not interested in games, she's not playing hard to get. She just values herself too much to settle for someone who can't meet her emotionally. Because connection without vulnerability is performance, and she's too grown to perform. She wants to live, deeply, honestly, unapologetically, and the man who can meet her there, he becomes her safe space. Her confidant, her truth. So many chase the woman, but so few understand what it takes to keep her. It's not about gifts or gestures. It's about emotional presence. It's about doing the work to understand her inner world and the courage to let her understand yours. It's about knowing that strength and softness are not opposites. They are partners, that leading her doesn't mean overpowering her. It means walking beside her with integrity and care. She doesn't want a perfect man. She wants a present one. One who can be strong enough to protect her and vulnerable enough to let her in. One who can lead with grace, not control. One who can own his flaws without deflecting. One who can be honest even when honesty feels risky. Because the truth is, she would rather have an imperfect man who's real than a polished man who's pretending. Respect for strength, depth, and vulnerability is not just a romantic preference. It's a sacred requirement for a woman who values her own soul. She has built herself too carefully to hand her heart to someone who hasn't built himself at all. And when she meets the man who carries all three, strength that protects, depth that engages, and vulnerability that connects, she will not hesitate. Because that man is not just a partner, he's a mirror, a safe haven, and a co-creator of something rare. In a world full of masks, shallow exchanges, and emotional detachment, she chooses real, she chooses raw. She chooses the man who dares to be seen fully and loves her the same way. Because to her, that is not just attractive, it is everything. A woman who knows herself is no longer fooled by appearances. She has seen enough smiles that meant nothing, heard enough compliments that faded, and stood in the presence of men who seemed good but felt empty. She has grown past the illusion of charm without substance. She no longer judges a man by what he says when things are easy. She looks for who he becomes when things get hard. She doesn't fall for niceness without truth. She doesn't submit to generosity without consistency. Because surface-level goodness, though polite, isn't love, And she is not a woman who gives her heart to anyone who cannot meet her at the level of her soul. Emotional alignment is not about having the same hobbies or quoting the same philosophies. It's about resonance. It's about meeting someone whose emotional frequency makes you feel safe, not suspicious, calm, not confused, seen, not evaluated. It is the rare and beautiful space where mutual understanding lives without constant explanation, where emotional maturity and self-awareness hold the foundation of the connection, not fleeting emotions, not Instagram worthy dates, not flowery apologies without changed behavior. Too many women are taught to settle for "he's a good guy." But goodness without alignment is like a beautiful house built on the wrong foundation. It looks good from the outside, but it will collapse under pressure. She knows this. She's lived it. She's trusted too soon. She's stayed too long. She's made excuses for nice men who didn't have the capacity to hold her. And now she understands that not every man who means well is meant for her, because love at its highest level is not just about kindness. It's about compatibility. It's about emotional harmony. She doesn't want a man who simply treats her well on the surface, but fails to understand her beneath it. A man who checks the right boxes on paper, but cannot communicate when her soul is heavy. A man who opens doors, but closes himself off emotionally. A man who praises her strength, but shuts down when she reveals her softness. These men are good in theory, but in practice they leave a woman feeling alone, even when she's not. Surface-level goodness often looks like consistency at first, but it lacks emotional depth. It's routine without revelation. It's politeness without passion. It's affection without attunement. And a woman of depth can feel the difference. She can sense when she's being loved out of obligation versus intention. She knows when someone is doing what they think love is versus actually feeling love with her. And that knowing changes everything. She doesn't need another man who texts good morning, but doesn't ask how her heart is doing. She doesn't need another man who posts her picture, but can't sit through a real conversation. She doesn't want scripted affection. She wants soulful connection. A man who feels with her, not just for her. A man who doesn't get overwhelmed by her complexity, but instead gets curious about it. A man who doesn't rush her healing, but honors the layers of her story. That is emotional alignment, because when a woman has healed or is healing, she becomes selective in a way that might look cold to some, but it isn't. It's self-respect. It's emotional intelligence. It's discernment. She no longer asks, "Is he a good guy?" She asks, "Does his emotional presence match my emotional needs? Does he understand emotional safety? Does he take accountability when he falls short? And most importantly, do I feel more myself with him or less?" She knows that emotional alignment is not just about how he makes her feel in the beginning. It's about how he shows up when feelings fluctuate. It's about emotional regulation, not just romantic intention. Does he still listen when he's angry? Does he respect her when she sets a boundary? Does he stay present when things feel uncertain? These are the silent tests that define a man's readiness for real love. Because a woman like her does not need more emotional labor. She's done rescuing men who refuse to evolve. She's done translating her feelings to someone who isn't even fluent in his own. She's not waiting around for a man to one day wake up and value her emotional world. She's choosing a man who already does. A man who is emotionally available, not just emotionally reactive. A man who has done the work, not perfectly, not completely, but sincerely. This kind of alignment cannot be faked. It shows in the way he handles conflict. It shows in the way he apologizes. It shows in how he holds her emotions when they're inconvenient. She sees how he treats the version of her that isn't smiling, the version who's tired, anxious, maybe even hurting. Does he show up with presence, or does he withdraw? Does he blame, or does he support? These moments reveal more than flowers and dates ever will. Surface level goodness might impress her for a moment, but it will never sustain her for a lifetime. Because she wants more than a man who looks right. She wants a man who feels right. A man whose presence brings peace to her nervous system, not tension to her thoughts. A man who doesn't make her guess what's going on because he communicates. Who doesn't punish her with silence because he understands connection requires effort. Who doesn't shut down at every hard conversation, but instead leans in willing to grow. She doesn't care if he's never raised his voice. That doesn't make him aligned. She wants to know, when he does feel anger, can he express it in a healthy way? Can he sit with his feelings without projecting them onto her? Can he disagree without disrespecting? Can he love even when it's uncomfortable? Emotional alignment is built in those moments. When tension rises, when egos flare, when the masks come off. To align emotionally means both people have done enough internal work to hold space for each other. Not to be perfect, but to be present, not to fix each other, but to feel each other, to say, I hear you, without defensiveness, to say, I'm here, even when the world feels heavy, and that alignment is rare. Not because it's impossible, but because most people are still operating on autopilot, still reacting, not responding, still afraid of depth, still addicted to performance, but she can't perform anymore. She won't, she's too awake, too aware, too protective of her peace. She's learned that being alone and aligned is better than being accompanied and emotionally exhausted. She's learned that love isn't love if it's one-sided. She's learned that saying no to a good man who doesn't emotionally fit is an act of self-love, not selfishness. When she meets a man who is emotionally aligned, she knows it, she feels it. His presence doesn't drain her, it nourishes her. His touch doesn't just thrill her, it calms her. His words don't confuse her, they reassure her, and most importantly, his actions don't contradict his emotions. They reflect them. That is where trust is built. Not in promises, but in patterns. Not in perfection, but in presence. She doesn't want a man who's just good to her. She wants a man who's good for her, a man whose goodness is not an act, but a reflection of his inner alignment. A man who doesn't just love her body, but also honors her spirit. A man who sees her not as something to fix or possess, but as someone to cherish, understand, and grow with. Because emotional alignment means she doesn't have to explain her heart in every conversation. It means her silence is not misinterpreted. Her vulnerability is not dismissed. Her sensitivity is not weaponized. Instead, it is met with empathy, with curiosity, with love, not because he's trying to impress her, but because that's simply who he is. That's how he loves, and she will wait for that. She will protect herself from anything less, because her heart, her energy, her emotional world is sacred, and only a man who truly understands that will ever be allowed to hold it.